Paul Seegert, managing partner, PCS Advisers, joins us now. We've had Paul on the show quite a bit, and great to have him on again today. Paul, how are you on this glorious Saturday?
Doing great. Happy Saturday to you.
Yes, absolutely. Why is the rollout so riotous in so many, I hate to use that word, but it is, so riotous in so many different states? What's going on here?
Well, we have a republic, and the control was given to each of these states, actually more than just the states. There's 64 existing jurisdictional centers around the country and territories and some large metro areas that have been in charge of distributing vaccines for many decades. And so the Trump administration's plan was to focus Operation Warp Speed on getting vaccines to market, helping to subsidize that effort, and then relying on these jurisdictional centers to distribute vaccines with CDC guidance as to who to prioritize, but ultimately it would be their job to get those vaccines in people's arms. And they've done a fairly consistently poor job at that just by the numbers. And funny, you were mentioning as we were getting into this topic here a second ago, some of these states that are very loudly talking about ordering direct. New York, as an example, is sitting on half the vaccines that were distributed to them. So they have half the vaccines that they've received so far not in people's arms, and they're talking about buying direct. California is at 37%, Ohio's 43%, Colorado, another one that you mentioned, 53%, Minnesota 42%. So they haven't gotten the vaccines that they've got in-house out into the population, and yet they're talking about buying direct. I think that's a little bit interesting to me, but there's certainly some story there. So
Ohio is at 43%?
Right.
I just got an email from it's a large hospital chain. Most of my healthcare providers are in there, most of my doctors, and it just said, okay, check we'll show you where the distribution centers are. Keep checking back with this website inside the state that will tell you when it's your turn to get the vaccination. My age group is sometime around February the 8th. But yet I see what's going on in Florida, and understandably there's a lot of elderly people that live in Florida, but that seems to be percolating right along. I mean, Ron DeSantis, the governor down there, seems to have figured this stuff out, and they actually had a plan, knowing that this was coming. Why could he figure it out, and some of these other governors could not?
Well, he opened it up to elderly citizens and just their population at large a little sooner than the others, and I think the rest are kind of figuring it out after, if that has been fairly effective. They are much higher up on the list in terms of their ability to get distributed doses administered. They're not at the top. They're right at 49%, but that's above a lot of these others that we've discussed. The top states are often, they're states you wouldn't necessarily expect. North Dakota, West Virginia, those are in South Dakota, New Mexico, they're leading the way up into the 70s for West Virginia. A lot of those states they're not heavily populated states. True enough, yeah.
So I don't know if it's supply and demand there. To me, everybody has been, on pins and needles. They've been frayed from a nerve standpoint since March, and here's the one thing that looks like hope, and it's such a catharsis to get this stuff from the manufacturer to the state governments to the people that live there.
Right.
I've heard that some of these states, now I don't know if this is true, I know what I see on television, and whether or not that's true, I don't know, but I've heard some of these states, particularly with the Pfizer vaccine, they're holding off on the initial vaccine because they're afraid they might not have that follow-up vaccine or enough of it a month later, which would render the initial vaccine less effective. Is that going on?
Yeah, that's going on. And then you also had, at even a national level, the second dose was being held back. When they sent a first dose, they would store the second to make sure they had it. They have since had discussions with the supply chain and Trump on the way out, and in agreement with Biden, said, let's release all the doses that we have and get those first shots in people's arms. We've got the supply chain ready to supply the second dose. Between just the first two approved vaccines, there's actually enough pre-purchased vaccine there between now and, say, July that will be in our hands to get to these numbers of, or close to these numbers of herd immunity that we've talked about. We've got 230 million or so. It would be 70%, which was the original herd immunity target that we'd been given. And then 300 million would get us up to 90. So between those two, we've got 500 million doses, enough to do 250 million people. And of course, we know many people have been infected, which is also going to contribute. Those numbers will contribute to that herd immunity number.
Sure.
So we have the vaccines. It's not so much can we get more approved, although that will be great. We really do, as you've pointed out, have to get better at getting this in people's arms.
Yeah, and the minute I heard that the states were going to be distributing this, my first reaction was, oh, good, the government's involved even more. And I get it, because there was nobody, this thing has morphed many times since March, and
right.
There was bad information, then good information, then bad information coming from all of these state health officials, the federal government. Their tune changed quite a bit. So I understand why, if you just said to the general population, hey, we've got 1 million doses of this thing, go to the Walmart parking lot on the east side of Cincinnati, and it'll be chaos. I understand why they're doing this, but it just seems like it's all reactionary. We'll do this when we have this many, and then if we have this many, we're not going to do it right away because we may not have that second dose. My point being is, was it a mistake in your mind to go through or give the power to the governors in these states, or should it have been done somehow, some way with private equity? In other words, hospital chains, for here we have Tri-Health, Mercy Health, or whatever. Was that a mistake?
I think we're seeing the facts would suggest that it likely was. And when we looked at these plans that these states and jurisdictional centers had prior to vaccine being available, they all were putting their own plans together in response or in accordance with the CDC guidelines. Some of them were, say, a few pages long. Some of them were literally hundreds of pages long as to who they were going to prioritize over, or what group over another group based on various disadvantaged statuses and so on. And it looked, a 300-page plan to get vaccines in people's arms looked a little bit overdone. And so perhaps it'll be more effective to do what Biden is proposing, where he's saying, now, not to ignore what you pointed out, the part of the reason, while it's a small state in terms of population, part of the reason West Virginia has every person in a old elderly care facility has already been vaccinated. Retail pharmacy chain, and they got in there and got vaccines in people's arms, and perhaps that would have been more effective. That is part of what Biden's proposing, to use retail pharmacies, those national chains, more widely for the general population, not just elderly care facilities, and then to prop up, using FEMA and the National Guard, prop up thousands of temporary immunization centers around the country and start getting these out there.
Well, I hope he can pull it off. Paul Seegert, our guest, managing partner, PCS Advisers. We're talking about the fits and starts of the rollout of the COVID vaccine and why some states appear to be absolutely clueless. I'm just wondering here. I heard the new president say yesterday, basically threw his arms up and said, "We're not going to be able to slow the curve for the next few months." It's I just wonder, are the people that are advising him, and I know that Monsignor Fauci is still on his team in Washington, D.C., are the people that are advising him, in your opinion, better or smarter than the people that were advising Trump and his administration?
Not in my opinion. I think they're able to come in later in the process with more information at hand and see the issues that we're having and focus on resolving those. So I certainly hope that what they propose works. I think, though, we should give credit where credit's due and say it was absolutely record-breaking to get vaccines to market as quickly as we did, and Operation Warp Speed gets a lot of credit for that.
Yeah. No, I think that, as I look back on it, I think, again, there was conflicting information all the time, and the president, in a lot of ways, President Trump, in a lot of ways, he was his own worst enemy with saying some of the outrageous things that he said, ultraviolet light down your throat. I mean, he really and truly left himself open. I think genuinely he wanted an answer to this so we could go about the business of living our lives. I don't doubt that. And you're right. I mean, most of the time when you've got a vaccine, it's years. It could be decades. This was really pushed through. It was a great private equity and government effort. But I just sense like we got to the fourth quarter of this game and we couldn't figure out how to finish it off. Well, where do you think we're going here in the next 90 days? Do you think that there will be more of these vaccines and we can dig deeper into the population and go younger? I think, the over 80 crowd, the 80 crowd, it's going to come down to 70, I would think, at some point. I mean, where do you think we get to a point where we have enough people vaccinated or have had this thing that we can actually go to a concert or a baseball game or whatever it might be? Are we talking 90 days or deeper into the year than that?
I expect it'll be deeper into the year than that. Very optimistically, in 90 days, if we could. Now, of course, Biden's plan is to say 100 million vaccine in the first 100 days.
Well, that's what Trump was saying. Trump said the same damn thing.
Exactly. So I'm not expressing a ton of confidence that we'll be able to do that because that would require a lot of this funding and this new stimulus that he'd like to get done to be done, and that's going to clearly take some time in negotiation. And the idea that you would, when you look into that plan of 100 million vaccines in 100 days, and I have a big question mark on my board in my office that says, is this feasible? Supply chain, yes. Willingness, there's other issues. Hesitancy to take the vaccine. We've got a lot of work to do there. Part of his plan is to hire and train 100,000 government employees to go into areas and communities that are underserved communities and educate people that the vaccine is safe, amongst other things. Just the idea of hiring 100,000 people and training them is a massive effort that I can't imagine occurring in 30 days. And then the idea of mobilizing FEMA and redirecting what we're doing to retail pharmacies, there's a lot to what he's proposing, and I don't think 100 days is necessarily reasonable to get that all done. But if we were to do half as good as we hoped and just get the first group done, the essential healthcare workers and folks in elderly care facilities, which are 24 million, we're between 16 and 20 million that are in people's arms right now, depending on who you believe. And then work into that second group, which is 49 million of the next level of essential people, educators and so on. And that, that next age group down chronologically, that's another 49 million people. If we had that 49 and the 24 and those that already had it, now we would be making some progress. But I still think it would take a few months beyond that to get it to a point where we could see this easing up.
Well, good. They're hiring 100,000 people to work for the government. Six most fearing words that you'll ever hear. Don't worry, the government is here. Anyway, Paul Seegert, good stuff. Managing partner, PCS Advisers. I hope when we talk next, it's a little less muddled than what it is now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.